So what do we mean by social impact? This is really kind of how people and planet and profit come together. When we think about any kind of organization we interact with, typically there's sort of something that's primary to that organization, right? So Nike, what is Nike's primary goal as an organization? To sell merchandise, to sell product, right? And to sell product at what? At profit, right? So to be able to create a product that we as customers want to purchase because we find it to be something of value to us that we're willing to spend money on, and to do so less expensive than we're willing to buy, right? So there's a profit that's made, right? But Nike might also do some other things that are ancillary to that the core business function, which is to sell tennis shoes and to sell apparel, which might be things around thinking about how this impacts their employee base, the communities in which they operate, maybe the environment in terms of supply chain, the choice of materials, and things like that, right? So social impact encompasses all of those things. So I want you to be thinking about in your ventures, how is it that you are impacting not just a customer product fit or customer service fit, but how are we impacting the environment more broadly and the community and or humans more specifically. So that's when we're talking about social impact. We're talking about how all of these things come together and are shaped. So there's a spectrum of types of organizations that seek to create impact, right? Every organization has impact. Some impacts, as we said, are negative, and some impacts are positive. Some impacts are big, some impacts are little. And so this is to give you a sense of kind of the range in which organizations have been constructed. So in the early 60s, 70s, 80s, most of us, your parents would say, there were two kinds of organizations I interact with. I have traditional businesses with which I buy things and I get services from, and then there are nonprofits which do services in my community, right? And a third group you might want to say would be our government agencies that provide services to the public. But over time, we have created new ways in which we're trying to deliver impact that's more of a hybrid model, which is these are organizations that blend the traditional role of business to be profit maximizing and the role of traditional charity to be socially embedded in communities, right? And so I want you to have a sense for sort of what these models are. If you look off to, is there a way to do a clicker here? Can you see that? Traditional businesses here, so there's a pure profit mainstream. And over time, we've seen companies start to look at, well, we can't just try to strive for profit, right? We've got to think about more broadly our impact due to the products that we're putting in the marketplace, okay? Historically, we've paid taxes to cover the cost of those externalities, those impacts, right? But that's not enough. We as modern consumers say that's not enough, right? You have to do more. And so companies have created corporate social responsibility programs and foundations where they give money back into organizations. So first I want to take you to Lowe's as an example of a company that is doing corporate social responsibility. So you may be designing a product that you're thinking is very much focused on meeting a customer need. It's going to be for-profit focused, but there might be ways in which you can also create some impact outside of just that profit lens. And so here at Lowe's is a hardware store. Everybody been to Lowe's? Shopped at Lowe's? Parents been to Lowe's, right? They're customer service. So Lowe's has a corporate responsibility platform. So in their platform on the website, you'll see they focus on things like product sustainability. This is sort of how they source their products and deliver products to you that allows them to be environmentally conscious. They have programs in which they are focused on the people in their community and giving back into the community in which they work. And then they have focus on making sure they operate most efficiently. So programs at companies that do things like replace more energy to more inefficient light bulbs, or places that think about more around transportation and supply chain would fall in this corporate kind of social responsibility impact. So if I were to click here on operational excellence, if I wanted to learn more about what they were doing, I can scroll down here, we're getting to. So here's one of their goals, reduce their environmental footprint, okay? Trying to do some kind of positive impact. And here's their goals, so they're measuring it, right? So it says here, improve store energy efficiency 13% per square foot by 2020, making every store more energy efficient. So they're putting in probably more energy efficient light bulbs, as I mentioned. They're probably adjusting entrance and exits and things like that. Reduce waste per net sale, 40% down, reduce store carbon emissions by square foot, right? So those are their goals, and then they'll talk about kind of how well they're doing, right? So far they've reduced to 25%. Okay, so this is one way in which an organization that is profit maximizing is thinking about how they can create other types of impact. Okay. Then you have organizations over here which are for profit but are more mission driven, meaning they're constructed and created to both achieve a profit goal so they can scale, but to do so in a way that is embedded, some sort of social or environmental purpose is embedded in their work that they do. And so Patagonia is a great example of a company that is a mission-driven for-profit company. So let's see how Patagonia talks about it. So they also use the phrase environmental and social responsibility, but you'll see for Patagonia, it's not simply about store footprint and carbon reductions here, but it's about creating organizations that are helping to do things, so having a greater influence in their supply chain as well as in the behavior of their customers. And so they have a whole list of programs they do. So they have an activist component for social change. They have an environmental impact program they have, and then of course supply chain, which you'll find in most big companies. And if you look at their annual report, Patagonia is the type of for-profit company that has decided to follow the benefit corporation model, which is a way in which they hold themselves accountable for their social and environmental impacts. So they're graded on how well they're doing in things like employee relations, pay, issues of gender equity, pay equity, issues of community giving, governance, and things like that. So if you scroll down on their report, you'll see here where they're pointing out, so they've given almost $90 million for environmental work. They fund this many proposals. These are employees who are invested in grants and so on, and what they're doing with their nonprofit, as an example. Okay. Then you have companies like Grameen Bank, which was founded in Bangladesh in the 1970s, that is also for profit, but is 100% focused on reinvesting those profits back into its social impact model. So whereas Patagonia is a privately owned company, and those profits oftentimes translate into benefit to its employees or to its owners. In the case of Grameen Bank, all of its profits are funneling back into serving its core mission of creating social impact. So Grameen Bank would be an example of an organization where it's doing social impact at the heart of its mission, but it's using the tools of business, the tools of creating profit to actually achieve that impact. Does that make sense? Then you have companies that are doing some pieces of enterprise work, meaning they're creating some profit, but again, very much focused on mission oriented. And I wanted to share with you, one of them is DC Kitchen, which is a workforce development program in the District of Columbia. I can come back to that one. That has a series of social ventures that they've launched as part of it. So they're structured as a nonprofit, but the primary source of revenue to help them do their programming is through social ventures, which are creating income, creating profit. So they have a job training program for individuals coming out of the prison system. They sell those meals and have a culinary business that then caters to government agencies and companies in DC. They have Healthy School program. They're trying to address issues of food deserts in DC. They work with universities, all through the tools of building and constructing social ventures. Okay, so we're moving towards impact, social impact or environmental impact being more to the core of the organization. And then you move closer to traditional charities, where there might be some market-based revenue stream, some way in which they're creating a profit, but most of it's through maybe donations or through grants to achieve their social impact goal. And then traditional charity, where 100% of their revenue are brought in through donations and grants and philanthropists. So let me show you a couple examples of what they talk about. So another job training program that's not as much for-profit oriented is called CEO. So their goal is to reduce recidivism and increase employment. It's an employment training program for hard to employ individuals in a community. So here's how they track it. How many people are going through their employment program? How many are working daily? What kind of crews they have operating? They provide job readiness training, you can see here. Transitional employment, as people are moving through the system. And then they have job coaching and placement and retention. So the goal is to try to encourage long-term employment among the constituencies that they serve. And then Harlem Children's Zone, which is a nonprofit organization in New York, was created to really connect the needs of children and community with community assets, 100% philanthropic organization. Okay, so here's how they track their rate. So college graduates, 6,000 college graduates in 2000, 97% have gone on to college of that population, right? So that's an important goal for them. How many youth they've actually served? Almost 13,000 kids have gone through their program. Families that have become stable through the help of their support system and the foster care system and so on. So you can see how they measure it, right? So depending on the organization's goals, its core mission, it will report out and think about impact in different ways, right? With all towards an eye of measuring it. Any questions so far? Can you kind of see some of the distinctions? And you might be thinking about your project in terms of where you sit in that spectrum. So let's dig into a very specific example here. I think I have a short little bit. Oh my gosh. Let's click on this video real quick. All right. So this company was founded in 2005 by 4 entrepreneurs in India. The idea for the company was hatched due to some unfortunate circumstances. One of the founders was in New York, another was based in Mumbai. Both parents experienced a health situation within a week of each other. In New York City, the co-founder there was able to call 911 and have his mother sent to a hospital rather quickly and receive medical care. In the other case, in India, there was no ambulance service to call, so they put her in the car with the whole family and piled in and tried to race through traffic to try to get her quality of care. And as they were comparing notes, it just felt like there was a really important need that was not being met in the city of Mumbai by not having an ambulance service, and thus the idea was created. The impact that they were trying to create at the heart of this business, of course, is to save lives. Does that make sense? So the company was growing and having some early success. They got up to about 7 ambulances within 2 or 3 years. They were struggling with some of the issues of government regulations. She talked a little bit here about getting people to recognize what an ambulance was, changing driver behavior, for example, and allowing people to know what it meant and to dial 1298. So the government of India was not as interested in supporting this early on, but they did find a couple of investors who wanted to put some money in and saw the opportunity. The investors were interested not just in saving lives through an ambulance company service, but actually reaching a certain population within Mumbai that didn't even have access to the right hospitals and or, in many cases, cars. And these were many of the slum communities where most taxi drivers wouldn't even go into. So they had an investor coming in that was interested in creating an impact that was providing access to this service to bottom of the pyramid people in the slums that didn't have, whereas the founders were really interested in just saving lives no matter where, right? And then we had the terrorist attacks that occurred in Mumbai. This ambulance service was the first service on the ground with their 8 vehicles. It wasn't long after that, of course, that the government decided this was probably a really important public service to be investing in. And so then their impact for 1298, their desire was to encourage 1298 to expand beyond Mumbai and to become a national model. So you've got 3 sort of key stakeholders in the growth of this company, each with a different eye towards what impact meant, right? And so I think that's important also as you're framing your venture. You as an entrepreneur will have some perspective about what that impact is that you want to create, but recognizing that other stakeholders that are affected by your solution might have a different definition of what impact is. Which comes to our next slide, which is that impact management happens in a very complex ecosystem, that what the entrepreneurs were very clear about and what the government was seeking and what the investors were looking for were somewhat aligned. I mean, they were all moving in the same broad direction, but when it comes to actually delivering on that impact, there were some challenges that needed to be worked out. So the idea of how your community, your employees, the assets around you, other businesses who invest in your organization make a big difference in how you manage impact. So I want to share with you another example about impact. This organization is called Springboard Education. It's based in Massachusetts, and it's a company that's designed to serve kids in an after-school program. The gap that it's meeting is actually the ability to be in lower income schools with a quality program where teachers are actually leading the after-school program as opposed to outsourcing it maybe to another third party. Their orientation and their goals, their impact goals, is to try to close the achievement gap. That's why they constructed the program. It wasn't as if they thought, we need another after-school mentor program. It was about how do we think the best approach is to close the achievement gap in low-income communities while providing a safe learning environment. What does that model look like and what should our solution be? And so the idea that they came up with was Springboard, and they employed teachers to actually be there to help work with the students. So from a parent perspective, you're a parent in this community and you're working long hours, maybe multiple jobs, maybe taking buses, and now your child has a safe place to be after school. And not only just a safe place, but a place where they're actually getting their educational goals met by continuing after work. So today they serve 5,000 kids. They're in 13 states and 88 schools, and they're mostly public and charter school programs. So working parents really love the program, and the impact that they're measuring, of course, what can they count? Number of kids served, the socioeconomic status of those children. They ask about whether or not the kids are attending school, particularly if you think about middle school and high school, more frequently because they're completing their homework more often, so they're attending school, and what other kind of outcomes are being driven to demonstrate that achievement gap closing. This is where impact is both really promising but also quite complex to be able to talk about all of those things together. So when you're thinking about how you're going to measure impact, you really have to focus on 3 key things. The first is to define the intentions and constraints, which is what is it that you're trying to do, right? The purposes of putting together your product or service is to do something, like what are your intentions behind that and what do you envision happening to help that? That then drives what your financial and impact goals are. These things have to be aligned, right? Are you guys learning business model? Have you done probably a couple of sessions on that already? So does the model that you're constructing to get your product or service in the hands of its users assist or deter you from achieving your impact goals? So those things are deeply connected. And then you want to go and understand the experiences of the people and the environment in which you are affecting, and to know whether or not you're actually achieving your goals. And finally, when those are well aligned, you'll see very clearly how you are delivering on that initial promise that you're hoping. So I've got a rubric I'm going to give you to show you how to start to frame those measurement tools out for you and construct that for your venture. So this is the handout that you have. It helps you really conceptualize sort of 5 key dimensions, right? Anytime we're doing anything, we have to understand the core components of what we're trying to design. And so in this case, you'll see there are 5 key dimensions that you want to evaluate for your social impact. So when you're coming back for your presentation on Saturday, you want to have evaluated each one of these dimensions for your concept, for your idea. That is your goal, and to be able to talk about that, right? And these effects that you're going to have could be positive or could be negative. So I'm going to ask you to really think hard about the positive effects as well as the potential negative effects, right? When you think about the ambulance service, we talked specifically about the positive effects, right? That it would have on lives in communities. What are the negative effects that could potentially happen as a result of that business? What do you guys think? Yeah.
What if the Mumbai transportation system is not as developed, so all the traffics have to yield to the ambulance? Mm-hmm. Could that potentially cause more traffic accidents?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, potentially. Yeah, could be a negative impact. Yeah. What else? Yeah.
I don't know if this is what you were thinking, but there's also a high risk of corruption, and maybe we're able to pay more.
If they don't pay attention to who they're serving in their model, yeah. They do. They did develop a pretty robust tiered pricing model. So they do serve all communities. And if you were in a lower income community, you pay much, 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 much less. And they have partnerships with hospitals to allow them to take. So they have to address some of that, but you're right, that could be a potential negative consequence. What else? Yeah.
Providing the proper care within the ambulance.
Okay, so maybe not having the proper qualification, if they can't find the right medics or doctors, so that could be a risk. Do more harm than good to the patients, right? If you go back to sort of this, this picture here, is there anything that you can think of in that ecosystem that could potentially have a negative consequence of this business growing and being successful?
Policymakers, so if they're taking on this responsibility, then maybe the government feels like this is not something that they need.
So maybe, giving them a pass, but there could be other changes maybe in policy that could have a more positive impact. But yeah, okay, right. So the government says, well, they're solving it, so we don't have to worry about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, right. So they could potentially create more harmful emissions. Yeah, so there's probably negative environmental consequences to building a car company, right? That's the one I was really looking for, but they all are perfect suggestions, what you guys have said. They're great, and you're thinking the right way, right? So sometimes we focus on one part of our impact and we forget to consider the other consequences to a different one. So that was great, that was good. Okay, so let's get through these 5 dimensions. The first dimension is what outcome are you trying to create, all right? This is core no matter if you are just a pure for-profit, at any rate, you're building it for something, right? You're trying to achieve something, but what outcome, positive or negative, are you driving towards, right? And you want to ask whether or not it's important to the people experiencing it. So sometimes we might have ideas for interesting services, but if only 3 people have a need for them, that's not really material. So you want to evaluate if the outcomes you're striving to create really matter to your end users, to the people who are going to be using your product or service, right? How important is it? So for example, Springboard, closing the achievement gap and improving test score for kids was the outcome they were striving for. The method by which they were doing that was through an after-school program. It wasn't the reverse, right? And sometimes we tend to think about our solution or our product first because we get so excited about it. But this asks us to flip it the other way around. Like, what is it that we want to see in the future? What is our vision for change? And then what's the best way for us to get to it? Number 2, who experiences this effect and whether they are underserved in relation to the outcome. So that's a lot of words, so let's break it down. So who is it that we're trying to affect change for, right? And specifically for that particular population, do we find that they're underserved? So an example might be rather than simply focused on, I'm trying to create a new product or service for, quote, the poor, More what you need to be orienting around is, I am trying to create a new solution or product for people that are not being met by the current marketplace, or the current system's not serving their needs well. And also really important orientation to be successful at creating social impact. For example, if you were thinking about diabetes treatment, you would be looking at what people are underserved by current diabetes treatments and how can I reach them better, rather than simply putting a set of demographics around them up front, okay? So thinking about it clearly about who you're trying to, who's affected by this problem, and whether or not they're underserved with respect to existing solutions. How much of the effect occurs in terms of how deeply you're engaging. So with Springboard, their goal is to go very broad, right? They would like to serve a lot of kids in a lot of places with a medium amount of touch points, right? So if it's an after-school program, 5 days a week, 3 hours, so 15 hours a week. Other types of solutions to close achievement gaps might want to create a scholarship program for 100 kids that have an intense mentoring-focused program and maybe have evening or weekend workshops that's much more intense. That might drive different set of outcomes. So you have to understand how much of your solution is really deep and how much, or if your solution is more broad in its approach, because you will inevitably create a different kind of impact. Neither is right or wrong. These are just the trade-offs you have to make as an entrepreneur seeking social change. Make sense in terms of depth and breadth? And then for number 4, we're talking about the contribution that this effect, what would happen anyways? Like if your product or service didn't work, what is sort of going to happen? What's the status quo? And so what is your added contribution, additionality, right? Now that you have brought this new concept, this new idea, what's going to happen better than if you weren't there in the first place? That's really important to understand. And lastly, the risk of the effect, right? What happens if you're not successful? And if you create unintended consequences? How much potential harm can you do? And in the field of social impact, this is a new framing for most organizations. We tend to not talk about unintended consequences, and now it's coming into the lexicon. So this structure I want to mention is a fairly recent design. It's been in the market for about 18 months now, and it was created by over 100 organizations that do impact investing and also work very closely with a whole hybrid set of different types of nonprofits and for-profits creating impact. And it's a wonderful construct, and I think it's asking more of us as innovators in terms of the kind of impact we're creating. So these are the pieces that you're going to answer when we start to break out into some time. So what does this look for Zakitza Healthcare? This is our 1298 ambulance service, right? So I filled this out for you so you can kind of get a sense of what material effects this organization's creating. What is it that they're doing? Well, the outcome they're trying to create is emergency medical services in India, right? The method by which they're doing it, of course, is by launching an ambulance service. Can you think of other solutions that could have the same impact, the same outcome? Emergency medical services in India? Is there other ways they could have solved this problem? Maybe there's probably a couple other ideas, yeah? And that's okay, right? So part of understanding is there are other solutions, but the question is which one is delivering on what, like how are we measuring and managing that overall impact? Who? Anyone needing emergency services is their customer, their end user. The Acumen focus, that's their impact investor, was really focused on having them serve the slums of Mumbai. That was really important to that investment, particularly because people of wealth lived, 1, closer to hospitals, and 2, mostly had cars or drivers and could get there. It was less of an issue. So that's who they're providing. How big, how much, how broad of a solution are they looking for, or how deep of a solution? They wanted a national system. So they were going to start in Mumbai and pilot that and see if they could get it working, but then they really wanted to expand to the other states in India. They wanted to provide ambulance access to anybody. And they wanted that ambulance access to be sustainable. So it had to be done in a way that generated enough profit. You guys can put that all right there. Enough profit for them to continue to reinvest. And then lastly, what's the risk to what they're building? Emergency responses might not be linked to long-term health outcomes, right? Just because now you have an ambulance service doesn't always mean the patient's not going to have a negative health outcome or die along the way, right? And then there are all those unintended consequences we talked about earlier, such as around things like environmental emissions, et cetera. So last but not least, before we kind of dig in, I wanted to talk about, so now you've sort of seen the 5-dimensional criteria, right? So these are how we're evaluating impact. And we want to talk about how do we categorize then that, right? So each of you have a concept that's going to fit in one of 3 categories. I call them the ABCs of social impact. I am going to assume that nobody in this room is constructing something that is focused on creating a negative outcome. I'm going to make that assumption. So you will not see that in here, okay? These are all assuming we're trying to do something that is better than existing. So the first A, the A is avoid harm. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Avoid harm. So here we have organizations that are trying to mitigate negative outcomes, all right? The kinds of organizations that avoid harm would be corporations with CSR programs, right? Those are the kind of companies that are really trying to negate things that they're already doing and try to be less bad, is what we always say, right? Or avoid harm. It's a perfectly reasonable approach to social impact, right? The second is the B, benefit people on the planet. These are organizations that are striving for positive outcomes, right? But in connection to maybe their key stakeholders, but not necessarily through their products or services, okay? So an example here would be an organization that has a diversity and inclusion program. That would be something that would benefit perhaps an underserved population, but they might be selling a product or service that in of itself is not destined to create some kind of social or environmental impact. And then last but not least, you have C, organizations that contribute to solutions. These are organizations where there is a specific positive outcome being driven, and it's going over a very long time. It's typically meeting an underserved need, and the product or service itself is what's driving towards that impact. Do you kind of see the distinction there? So A, B, C. All of your ventures will fit into one of these categories, and the key is to evaluate which one you are so you understand, don't either overpromise and underdeliver or whatever it might be. You understand kind of the construct for what you're actually building. So I want to do a couple case studies before we get pizza. Think about each of these, and I want you to tell me where you think they fit, okay? So maybe make a note to yourself, and then I've got the answers on the next page. But a chain of hospitals providing life-saving medical care to those with no previous access. Are those avoiding harm, benefiting people and planet, or contributing solutions? Just keep thinking to yourself what category you think that fits in, okay? So they're providing life-saving care to those with no previous access. Second one, an inner city bus company that mitigates its emissions and runs on renewable energy. Okay. An oil company which is not trying to mitigate its negative effects. A low-cost nutritional product to substitute unhealthy snacks at school. Does that avoid harm, benefit people on planet, or is it contributing solutions? A solar PV manufacturing company. A global manufacturing company that seeks to eliminate child labor in its supply chain. And then lastly, an online learning platform for learning foreign languages. Okay. Make a note. Think about which one, where you think each one goes. All right. Kind of have some ideas? Okay. Maybe your product or service fits in one of these or thinks about one of these. So here it is. Of course, the oil company not trying to mitigate its negative effects is not an A, B, or C. So they may have significant effects on negative outcomes for underserved people on planet, right? But they're not trying to have a positive social impact. As I mentioned, I don't think that meets anybody in this room or in the Make-a-thon. But it's important to have that on as a comparison. Avoid, so trying to prevent a significant negative impact by doing something that's doing less harm. An inner city bus company that runs on renewable energy, right? So in that case, the core business is, of course, to run a bus company, right? So transporting people from one place to another. is its core business model. So that in of itself may not necessarily be contributing to solutions, but by putting it on renewable energy, you're creating less harm, right? You're not using the most harmful methods of transportation. A global manufacturing company that seeks to eliminate child labor in its supply chain, same idea, right? They may be creating, maybe a bottled water company, it could be a cell phone company, it could be a clothing company. So their core mission is focused on very much a profit-driven objective, but they're trying to do less harm by adjusting their supply chain. Okay, so that's good. A benefit, so having various effects on and outcomes with people, a low-cost nutritional product that substitute unhealthy snacks for students might be a benefit for people and for planet. An online learning platform for learning foreign languages may also have a benefit. And then contributing to solutions, so the hospital's providing medical care to those with no previous access. So here's where you're constructing a product or service that's reaching that underserved population that doesn't currently have access to the current market. A solar PV manufacturing company might be another example where their product, again, is specifically designed to have an environmental impact. So really the difference between B and C is whether or not your core product or your core service is designed to be the impact in and of itself or not. Does that make sense? So if I think about 1, 2, 9, 8, where do you think we'd put them? The ambulance service, yeah? Contributing to solutions? Yeah, that's what I think too. Just because it's a new service reaching a new population. Yeah, but it has, as we mentioned, it can have negative consequences, right? That's part of it. So what we're going to do is eat, because that smells really good. I want you to take time once you have your pizza to kind of work on your own to construct your impact dimensions for your idea, and take maybe 15 minutes to do that, and then I'm going to have you work in groups, and maybe 3 different teams together, share that with each other, like this is what I came up with, does this make sense, to get feedback from one another. And I'll circulate, Gabby and Jackie from Campus Wire are here as well, they also do the social innovation program, so they're going to circulate, so can answer questions you might have and kind of help you do that. And I'm hoping once you've got this constructed, then when you are preparing for your presentation this weekend, it'll be really clear. Like you'll have, like, here's the mission of my product or service, here's what I'm trying to achieve, here's how I'm going to do it. It'll be really clear. So, make sense? Questions? I'll leave this up too in case you need some deeper definition about how to construct that, but that would be our goal for the rest of the session. Okay, should we eat?
Sure.
Awesome, thank you.